Oh, hello, come in. Hi. Oh, nice to see you again. Just looking at various pictures of... I've managed to get away recently to the river just for a little bit and float. I would say row or sail, but it's been so still I've hardly... This is my little boat, Willow. My daughter took this photo, this is me from behind. I like this particularly just because I love the reflections are always so beautiful. The reflection of the... She's a little sailing canoe. She's a Victorian sailing canoe. In fact, she's not Victorian herself, but she's a replica of a wonderful design of sailing canoe by a kind of adventurous Scotsman called Rob Roy McGregor. And I've got his book, 1,000 Miles in the Rob Roy Canoe. Anyway, funnily enough, my lovely float on the river in Willow, getting back to messing about in boats, I remember, I read you from Wind in the Willows before, but it put me in mind of another wonderful floating in a boat passage, this time in George MacDonald's book, Phantastes. I read you a bit of Lilith the other day because of the transformation scene in the library. But as well as appreciating libraries and writing wonderfully and mystically about books themselves, MacDonald also just occasionally has boat passages, and he writes exquisitely about the kind of, not the technicalities of boats or sailing, not in the way that Arthur Ransom does, but he writes about the actual aesthetic sensations, the wonderful streams of images, the way thoughts well and rise in one's mind. I would say it's not just the rich sensual experience of being in a boat that he describes so well. But in MacDonald, sensuality is always spirituality as well. The images that he shows are always rich with something more. And there's a particularly fine, well, two fine accounts in Phantastes of little boat journeys. But the first one, which is what Willow made me think of, and let's get this going. This is a Scottish pipe, by the way. This is a Nimbus made by Rattrays in Perth, so I thought I'll smoke that in honour of celebrating a Scottish author. So as I say, they're amazingly visually, sensory, rich, evocative passages, but they're always full of meaning. They're always suggestive, richly suggestive of spiritual states. So in that sense, the boat becomes a soul boat, a soul ship, and the river becomes a stream of life and being. Anyway, there's a wonderful bit where the hero of this story, who's called Anodos, which means on one level pathless or without a path, without a way, but also can mean upwards. And it's about his journeys through fairyland. And eventually, this is the passage where, having walked a great deal and walked through a desert, and then found a stream and followed the stream downstream until eventually it becomes a lovely little river, which he doesn't know is going to guide him towards the fairy palace where he needs to go. So he finds a boat and gets into it. At length, in a nook of the river, gloomy with the weight of overhanging foliage, and still and deep as a soul in which the torrent eddies of pain have hollowed a great gulf, and then, subsiding in violence, have left it full of a motionless, fathomless sorrow, I saw a little boat lying. It's already a spiritual setting, isn't it? So still was the water here, that the boat needed no fastening. It lay as if someone had just stepped ashore and would in a moment return. But as there were no signs of presence and no track through the thick bushes, and moreover, as I was in fairyland, where one does very much as he pleases, I forced my way to the brink, stepped into the boat, pushed it with the help of the tree branches out into the stream, lay down in the bottom, and let my boat and me float whither the stream would carry us. That's that moment of letting go of the desire to control and do things and letting a stream of consciousness and awareness come. It's perfect a metaphor for that, but it's also a perfect description now of what it's like floating in a boat. I seemed to lose myself in the great flow of sky above me, unbroken in its infinitude, except when now and then, coming nearer the shore at a bend in the river, a tree would sweep its mighty head silently above mine and glide away back into the past, never more to fling its shadow over me. I fell asleep in this cradle in which Mother Nature was rocking her weary child, and while I slept, the sun slept not, but went around his arched way. When I awoke, he slept in the waters, and I went on my silent path beneath a round, silvery moon, and a pale moon looked up from the floor of the great blue cave that lay in the abysmal silence beneath. A wonderful description of the reflection of the moon. Why are all reflections lovelier than what we call the reality? Not so grand or so strong it may be, but always lovelier. Fair as is the gliding sloop on the shining sea, the wavering, trembling, unresting sail below is fairer still. That's just like the picture I showed you. The wavering, trembling, unresting sail below is fairer still. Yea, the reflecting ocean itself, reflected in the mirror, has a wondrousness about its waters that somewhat vanishes when I turn towards itself. All mirrors are magic mirrors. The commonest room is a room in a poem when I turn to the glass. In whatever way it may be accounted for one thing we may be sure, that this feeling is no cheat. For there is no cheating in nature and the simple unsought feelings of the soul. There must be a truth involved in it, though we may but in part lay hold of the meaning. Even the memories of past pain are beautiful, and past delights, though beheld only through the clefts in the grey clouds of sorrow, are lovely as fairyland. But how have I wandered into the deeper fairyland of the soul, while as yet I only float towards the palace of fairyland? Isn't that wonderful? He's saying, now I've taken you out of the fairyland of my description. The real fairyland is the fairyland of your own soul. The moon, which is the lovelier memory or reflex of the down-gone sun, the joyous day seen in the faint mirror of the brooding night, had wrapped me away. It's just wonderful. Lovely description of the moonlight and the boat floating. And then eventually he comes down and sees the palace. It was this lovely description of the moon in the river. Let me read you that first. I sat up in the boat. Gigantic forest trees were about me, through which, like a silver snake, twisted and twined the great river. Little waves, when I moved in the boat, heaved and fell with a plash as of molten silver, breaking the image of the moon into 1,000 morsels, fusing again into one as the ripples of laughter die into the still face of joy. The sleeping woods in undefined massiveness, the water that flowed in its sleep, and above all the enchantress moon which had cast them all with her pale eye into the charmed slumber, sank into my soul, and I felt as if I had died in a dream and should never more awake. Isn't that just glorious? And I love the molten silver breaking the image of the moon into 1,000 morsels, fusing them again together, like ripples of laughter on a face that then composes itself again to a kind of steady joy. I once actually, I haven't been out in Willow in moonlight, but I have actually been on the River Frio in a little canoe late at night with not only the moon, and the Frio Valley is in near San Antonio. It's got quite steep sides, so you can look up and really see the channel of the sky, and you could see the bright night stars and the moon. But it was all the more beautiful when you, instead of looking up from your canoe, you looked down into the water and you were absolutely still. And all the stars were shining bright in the water below you. And then just a little drip of water from the bottom of your paddle would set these ripples running, and all the stars would ripple away. And it was absolutely enchanting. And I think what MacDonald is saying is that's not only a beautiful thing that can happen to you, but as he says at the end of that passage, it all entered into my soul. Forever after, when you've been in such a beautiful place, you have new images with which to think, new images with which to clothe your own ideas of happiness or joy. And I wonder if that's partly why we're in this world, is to so absorb all its images as to be able to clothe our thoughts and make our poems and our love songs with them. Anyway, thank you for indulging me again in reading a bit of something that's a favourite. I must say, I'm rereading Phantastes with a group, an American group called the Rabbit Room at the moment, and it's a really beautiful experience. There's a fine MacDonald expert, Kirsten Johnson, is guiding us all through, and it's a great joy to re-enter the waters of this book. Anyway, good to see you. Thanks for dropping round.